Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for coming tonight for this IT Committee's event. My name is Yusuke Wada. I'm the IT Committee Chairman of FCCJ. And tonight we have special guest, Mr. Joy Ito, who is the president of Chiba IT University, and who is also the ex-MIT Media Lab, is also the one of the founders of Digital Garage, and who's also an entrepreneur and an investor in many fields. And on the side, we have journalist Mr. Hayashi, who is also a speaker last time in July. He's an IT journalist who's got a broad knowledge of IT in this field. And tonight we are doing this for the IT committee's fundraising, and we have a lot of issues of this FCCJ, of this IT, running this IT committee, and we're trying to get members, and we're hoping to bring in more people to be aware of this IT material and IT journalism and IT fields in this 21st century in 2024, because a lot of things are moving so fast in the world. And when in the 90s it was a dog year. In 2000, it was mouse year, a rat year. Now, I'm not even sure what kind of year it is. It's a quantum year. It's so fast, and everything's moving so fast. And we need to keep up, and we need to bring this FCCJ up to at least the 2020 level. And this is why we're having these kind of events tonight, bringing in special guests like Mr. Ito and Mr. Hayashi here. And would you like to say something about Hinza-san? We have Hinza-san is also a member of IT committee who will be the moderator tonight. And to you, Hinza-san.
Thank you so much, Wada-san. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for joining this event. This event.
Microphone closer.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
This event is organized by the IT committee. As the Wada-san explained everything, we are trying to be together and take some initiate in the media industry side, especially, and want to be connect with the investors to invest in the media technology part. So we have a very, it's my honor that we have two big personalities here who have an extensive background in the media industry and as a venture capital. So Joe Ito-san, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Joe Ito, and as Wada-san said, I'm the president of Chiba Institute of Technology, but I've been on the board of the New York Times and was on the board of the Knight Foundation, and we did a lot of work trying to support media. And even though the Media Lab is called Media Lab, it doesn't necessarily mean media is in this kind of media, but we did a number of things. And I've also been doing venture capital for many years, and I'm on my fifth fund and have invested in maybe a couple hundred companies, and some of them are media companies. And I've lived in the U.S. and Japan.
We have a Nobi-san who have an extensive background into taking the journalism activity, especially the IT sector, and they also have experience to work with the startups. Nobi-san?
Yes, well, my name is Nobi Hayashi, but everybody calls me Nobi. And I've been covering the tech industry since 1990, when I was studying in the United States. And I'm known as a journalist who's always invited to Apple event and introduced the new iPhone on TVs and magazines and web media. But these days, just like Joy-san, today, when I was coming here, I was listening to Joy Ito-san's podcast and realized, these days he's much into Channel U, the tea ceremony, etc. But as I'm getting older, I'm trying to connect the Japanese tradition and also the technology, because in the age of AI, everything will be overwritten by technology. But I want to preserve this precious culture of Japan. Talking about related to the tech startups, because I've been in the tech industry for more than 30 years, people in the tech industry in Japan, have read my articles. So I'm often invited to tech startups event like IVS, Infinity Venture Summit, or ICC, and because I'm not good at in speaking English as Joy-san, but I speak some English. So I was often serving as a moderator for international tech startups and also the Japanese tech startups. the bilingual session, and that's how I met, the leaders of the Japanese tech industry. And after 2007, when after iPhone came out, I was involved in some Japanese tech startups like Popin or Aplia or Castalia, which is a podcast startup. And I was mainly into, mainly in the international marketing. I was helping the international marketing. So I once held an event in San Francisco to introduce the Japanese tech startup to the Silicon Valley media, etc. So that's how I'm involved.
Thank you so much for your introduction. The first session is very important for us because in the first session we will be discuss two main points. The first point, what was as a venture capital looking for in the media sector or the IT part. The second session we will be discuss that what is the lacking in the startup IT sectors that they cannot be attract with the investors. My first question to the Joito-san, that can you please explain me that what are you as a venture capital, what they are really looking for in the IT part? And now we have a AI, decentralization, and blockchain.
So what are venture capitalists looking for just in general for AI and blockchain? Well, I mean, most venture capitalists, although not all of them, are looking for returns. And I think in particular, I would say that different countries have different styles, but the U.S. Silicon Valley venture capital are looking for very high risk and very high return. And so I think that so that means just they're buying low, selling high. And I think one of the key things, and I think every venture capitalist has a different way of picking and doing due diligence. But I would say that the majority of venture capitalists are looking for professional, ambitious, hardworking CEOs. I think the CEO is probably maybe the first most important one, which is challenging in Japan because we don't have as many experienced CEOs. And then they're looking for the other obvious things, which is the total addressable market. Is it likely to grow? Does it have a scalable business model? There are a variety of things. And I think just traditionally, and this is very cliche, but I think traditionally IT and software have become very favored areas because you get increasing returns without the increasing costs. So you can grow very quickly, and then unlike hardware, the reason software is interesting is you can pivot. So if you start tooling up to build a product and the product doesn't fit the market, you're basically out of luck. But with software, you can continue to iterate on the business model. And so it's been, obviously we've gone through a huge wave of and I don't need to repeat this. If just to put it a little bit in the Japanese context, though, with new software you get new architecture, and with new architecture you get new business models that displaces incumbents and causes transformation. But because the Japanese system is very difficult to change, you don't get the returns on software as much as you would get in the U.S. because you don't see the transformation in the business. People stick to old businesses even if they don't make sense. Companies transform much more slowly. So I think that the culture, the regulation, and the business practices in Japan have made returns in software much less. And then I think and media is just obvious. We can talk more about it, but I think that's the thing. That's been the traditional thing with IT, and I think that it's very difficult to transform old businesses that are stuck. And I think it's just been. I think it's eating old business models is how software makes its money, and I think eating media and taking the gains away from media into new platforms has been a substantial amount of the gains that we've seen in platform businesses.
I want to continue this conversation that the venture capitalists looking for the good entrepreneur or founders. You are the president of Chiba Institute of Technology. Actually, when we go to the MIT, when we go to the international universities, they are actually making an entrepreneur. They are really just like a founder creators. So what you think that the new generation, when we going for the startup side, they are the founder are more age starting with the 26 or 28. So what's your thinking about that? It's only just a startup for the young age, or how can we improve this part? we need to be work on that.
Yeah, so I think for a vibrant venture ecosystem, you need a whole system. So you need investors. First, you need investors who are willing to take risks and will back entrepreneurs and keep putting in money. But you also need a market that will work with these startups. You need risk-taking young people. So I think the Japanese system, the U.S. is somewhat like this, but Japan is, I think, worse, which is, the educational system, post-industrial revolution was to try to create standardized human beings that can work in the factory or work in white-collar jobs and be interchangeable and reliable and do as you're told, right? And so, you don't get a Nobel Prize and you don't become an entrepreneur by doing as you're told. But as you know, I think in Japan, it really is the thing that education was for, is to create obedience, And I think a large part of sort of middle-class American education is like that as well. But I think it was really kind of a standardization and scale under big companies. And I think the other problem is that technology. So if you look at, the history of education. So you look at Greeks, so you had the citizens learned liberal arts and the slaves learned mechanical arts. And mechanical arts, where you move your hand, and engineering was really the job of the people who did the grunt work. And it was really during the Renaissance that you saw even things like architecture for the first time move from the sort of mechanical arts to closer to the liberal arts. In the U.S., because it's much more commercial, as technology started to make money, really after World War II, you saw the Manhattan Project, you saw science and engineering becoming a first-class discipline, and schools like MIT were second tier. It was really the guys with the blue overalls going in to fix the equipment, and eventually you see these technology people, and then in the U.S. money talks. So once you start getting tech billionaires, people realize that technology is important, and you see institutes of technology becoming first tier along with the Ivy League people. But in Japan, liberal arts has always sat on top of engineering. And the only time that engineers get power in Japan, entrepreneurs get power, is when the system is kind of smacked. So you get after Meiji Restoration and all this technology comes in from the West, you get a lot of these kind of engineering barons that building the infrastructure like railroads and things like that. And then, and then it gets kind of fluffy, and then you get World War II. And after World War II, everything's kind of razed to the ground. So then you get the automobile companies and the personal electronics companies, where a lot of the founders are engineers building. But within a couple of generations, the engineers get pushed aside, and you get a bunch of liberal arts people running it, and all they care about who you know. And Japan becomes kind of fat and slow and non-engineering. And so I think in Japan, engineers are still second-class citizens. They don't get paid as much. You can never go from an engineer. It's very difficult to go from an engineering school to leadership. And people who want to be entrepreneurs don't become engineers, just as a general thing. You become an engineer if you're a little bit autistic and don't like interacting with people and just want to focus on numbers and kind of go. And so even though our school is primarily engineering, we have a 98.5% employment rate, which means that we have a less than 2% entrepreneurship rate. And most engineers just want to get a job and kind of work hard. And so a lot of it is cultural, but it's also that big companies treat startups as if they're second-class citizens as well. In the U.S., you often have to work with startups because they're going to come and take over your business. But in Japan, they tend to treat startups as sort of outsourcing, SMEs. And so again, it's changing. It's much better than when I started my company 40 years ago. It was really hard. It's still hard. It's hard to attract people. It's hard to raise money. It's hard to get big companies to work with you. And the regulatory framework thing is hard. Because of the language, it's hard to go work outside. So there's a bunch of stuff that makes Japan hard. But having said that, I think the government and everybody is pro-startup more than it's ever been in the history of Japan. It's a reasonably big market. There's a lot of things that are working in our favor, but we still haven't, I don't think, turned on the engine that you need to make the whole system. So education is just one piece of it. I think there's a whole, and the parents want their kids to go to big companies. I think they still think that going to work for the government is the highest rank. So we can go on, but there's a bunch of things, not just
just the one thing.
Yeah.
I want to be asked, Nobi-san. Nobi-san, you already work with the startups, and you have a interviewed a ton of the people who related to the IT part. Please share your experience with the startup companies.
Well, actually, today, I have done 90% of my work today, when I said, Joy-san, please check email from FCCJ and come to this event. So today I try to keep as quiet, give more time to, Joy-san, because this is such a precious opportunity. But
Yes.
my experience with startups. So, most of the startups, I think there's been a big change in Japanese tech startups, before 2008 and after 2008. And 2008 is the year, when iPhone came out. And this was the first opportunity for Japanese tech startups to, go abroad. I mean, they, before iPhone, they have to, their market was limited to Japan only, and, going abroad was such a big work. But after iPhone came out, once they have their localization done for English, they can have the whole market. And so since then, their challenge has been, how to promote their product, how to, promote their product, outside of Japan. And, connecting with foreign media was always a challenge because, to be successful, they need to have some attention. But, they may be able to, localize the product in English, but, getting attention from foreign media, foreign blogger is such a big challenge. But some, only limited number of Japanese startups, were able to have some success. Some company like Line had a small success in Taiwan or other Asian market, but Western countries always has been a challenge. And actually, maybe Joyce-san, can give some advice, to.
Joy-san,
Yeah.
I want to know more about that. What was the difficulties as a startup right now they are facing? As we discussed before that, you already work with the media startup as well. So can you share your experience for the startups
In Japan? Or?
in Japan or all over the world?
Okay. So my own experiences, I created a bunch of startups in Japan, but the one that eventually becomes successful in Japan is Digital Garage, and I founded a company in '92, I think, called Ecosys, which was doing web stuff, and then we merged it and turned it into Digital Garage. But back then, you couldn't. There was very little venture capital, so we had to borrow money from a bank. We had to personally guarantee it. And it was just so fundraising was very difficult. And like I said, it was very difficult to work with large companies. Back then, my partner was a subcontractor to advertising agencies, and we would and back then you didn't actually make money on the internet. You just made money selling things to people talking about the internet. So advertising was a big thing. And we built a bunch of businesses, but I guess just, then the legal system wasn't set up. It's still clunky, so you can't do secondary stock sales, and there's a bunch of the funds. The law in Japan is not conducive to venture funds and startups, so that's changing slowly. So there's a legal part, but I would say overall the biggest hurdle was that there are very few professional venture capitalists here, and many of the funds, the corporate funds and the bank funds, have sort of salaryman investors. And I think the key thing in the U.S. is many of the investors and most of the best investors are actually former entrepreneurs themselves. They've been doing it for many, many years. And in Japan, you sort of rotate people in, so they're not professional. They don't have. It's not a human network. It's more just these institutions, and they don't have a lot of experience. So I think that would be the biggest problem for startups here. Again, it's gotten way better. You don't have to do personal guarantee bank loans anymore. Big companies like Sony, where I was on the board, it used to be that they only did things that were invented here. They now have a fund. They now work with startups. They now do incubation. So many of the companies are changing. And so it's gotten a lot easier. And then the other problem in Japan was that people just like established big companies and brands. So even when I hired people, I hired one guy from Apple, but he had originally joined IBM, and his parents still thought he worked at IBM, and he quit IBM, went to Apple, but didn't tell his parents, and then he quit Apple to come work for me, and he still didn't tell his parents because he was afraid what his parents would think that he left IBM. And even as a university president, I look at the top-rated places to go, but it's still in many polls, central government, local government, big Japanese companies that start with Japan and Nippon. And then, but you now have like at 8 or 9, you have Apple and Google, but big foreign companies. But in general, it's still very conservative, and so those are the things that hold us back here. And then on media, so media used to be a good business, and the old joke like, how do you make a small newspaper? You buy a big one and you just wait. And I think that I was on the board of the New York Times, and all these big media companies. What happened with social networks, everybody knows this, but basically the internet platforms got all the customers, and they got the relationships, and they basically disintermediated the media businesses, and so just the content business became very thin, and the platforms became very thick, and it was and still is very difficult to come up with a media business that scales. And obviously, if it doesn't make money, venture capitalists aren't that interested in investing. And there have been many attempts at doing local news with AI, things like Nextdoor to try to build in community. But I would say overall they've failed. And I think that some companies have built media funds, and usually it has some sort of philanthropic motive. So at the Knight Foundation, we used to do a lot of grants for media. We used to do incubators for media. We used to do hackathons. But it's been very difficult, and I think if you look at investors in media, many of the state-owned ones, like Al Jazeera and others, have done well, and they start out with a kind of either a government or some sort of philanthropic motive. There have been a few funds, and people like Laureen Powell Jobs that I work closely with. I mean, she's bought The Atlantic, so you see individuals doing it, but you really don't see, as far as I know, I've seen venture capitalists, but I haven't seen any successful venture capitalists that primarily work in media. But I could be wrong. But I just don't. And I still think we're trying to figure out what the media business is. I think we're going to talk about blockchain later. I think there is the way that the platforms have gotten fat. I think the privacy issues. I think blockchain. I think AI may disrupt the power of the platforms, and I think there's an opportunity to change the architecture, which could change the business model of media. But given where we still are right now, with the big platforms sitting there holding all of the relationships and the accounts of the individuals, I think it's still pretty hard.
I want to at some point in this conversation. The Google News will be start from I think about 2009 or 19 something. So the Google News is created by an Indian guy, and it's changed the media, especially the mainstream media's industry wholly. The 46% share of revenue will go to the Google directly due to the Google News. Just because the media houses don't understand that how they can be improve or use the technology to innovate their product. So right now, the journalists writing the content on their website, that's it, and they will be try to be published and highlight on Google. So the revenue side completely one side, and the small share would be getting by the media houses. So continue this topic. I want to know more about, now this is the era of AI. We are facing the issue as a journalist. Every single person is going to be facing this issue, the duplicate content and all that. So many investors are investing in AI, but what do you think about that? That what kind of change will be happen in the media industry? What they need to improve themselves?
Yeah, I think there's different timescales. I think that we have the current LLMs and the current AI that we have now. As we all know, it hallucinates and makes errors, and so there really isn't some useful version of the current existing models, and maybe for another few generations, where you can just replace a journalist. I think that the journalist has to be in charge, and somebody has to be responsible for the facts and the content. I think that we will start to see more structured symbolic AI that can do fact checking, and I think that will start to change. But at least in the midterm, short term, what I think we see, and this isn't just with journalists, this is with anything that, whether you're an architect or a doctor or a lawyer, an accountant, somebody has to take responsibility. And I think that as the AIs get better, the errors will just get harder to detect, And so I think that what we're going to see, because they get smarter, but they're still they're still hallucinating. And so I think that what we see is, that AI makes people who are professional more productive, but it doesn't actually replace them. And I think, for instance, architecture is kind of interesting. I was doing a conversation with Ken Yahara, and he was saying that he just gets the AI to spit out dozens of what Ken Yahara style architecture, with whatever the client is looking for, picks the 3 that he thinks represent his style the best, shows it to the client, and then once the client chooses one, he'll go and work on it. But he can pick the 3 that are most like him, right? So I think that to take anybody who has their own style or their own taste, and it could be a journalist, and even journalists, I think, like I use AI quite a bit to really do the draft, and sometimes I've rewritten the whole thing by the end, but it really speeds up the creative process and things like that. And you can also get AIs to critique your article, and even if you disagree, it's actually quite useful. So I think it will make journalists more productive. And I think there's a set, even if the fact-checking starts to happen, I think there's a set of stuff that probably humans shouldn't be doing anyway, which is just taking a news, like a stock feed, and then just reading it verbatim. So I think there's some kind of grunt work kind of journalism that may disappear. But I think the key thing, so let me, to get a little bit more philosophical, so humans experience the world, right? So we go out, we feel the heat, we feel sad, we have an experience. AIs don't experience the world. What they do is they read things that come out of people who experience the world, right? And if you think about what society should be doing, so what society should be doing, and so evolution, how evolution works is the environment changes. You're supposed to understand how the environment changed, and then you sort of update your system or your structure to adapt to the environment. And the environment changes in many ways. Sometimes and in Japanese it's sort of kukyo, you read the air. So it at some point it became kind of common sense that actually women should vote. Actually, they're humans. Black people are humans. And the society progresses, right? And what AIs do is they can predict the future based on the past, but they can't progressively move forward and read the air as the world changes. So what I think the role of human beings, and I think by extension journalists, is to live in the world, experience the world, and notice how it's changing, and take those changes and express it as journalism or as art. And what we should be doing constantly is getting a sense of the world, making up our own priorities, which are kind of like our values. I think now climate is increasingly becoming important, but is climate more important than the aging population versus health? So you have all these trade-offs, and what society should have is kind of a sense of its preferences, right? And what journalism should be, I think, is a way of taking that set of people's experiences, expressing it in a way so that we can have a conversation about it, and then turning that conversation into something that politicians and bureaucrats and businesses can process into changes in the way we do things. And AIs can help with that by helping journalists write. And what we should be doing, and what media should be doing and AI should be supporting, is how to allow everyone to experience the world, share those experiences, and come up with a consensus of where we think society should be going. But the problem right now, because the media has been so damaged by the architecture that IT has created, we're not trying to drive consensus. We're not dutifully representing the experiences of the world. And so we end up with a fractured non-consensus, and then we've got AI that just is going on and doing its own thing. And so I think that we need to sort of reinvent the role, well, not reinvent, go back to the original role, I think, of the media, which one of the key things is to sort of understand what everyone is experiencing the world and try to share that with everybody else in the world and bring it to consensus. And so if you take the business model part out of it, I think that's still more than ever important because the world is changing and we have a lot of things that we need to discuss, but we're unable to do it.
Yeah, can't agree more. I often do lecture about, what sort of skill will be important in the age of AI, and I always, I always say, there's two kind of skills that will be very important. One is, like being Marco Polo type. Marco Polo type is to explore new value, because AI, LLM can only process, what has been on the internet in the past, but only human can explore, so maybe there's not much about space or, deep undersea information on the web, but, only human can, add those new types of information. And the other type is, Senrikyu type, like Senrikyu, the master of teeth, sort of determine this is very important. And so only human can determine, what sort of value will be, more interesting. So when we think about news, we always think, because it's called news, we think about something, the latest information. But, if you don't know about something, and even if it's an old information, it can be news to someone. So we always can determine, what is, from now on, this will be more interesting than this kind of information. So, one of the roles for journalists is to show and determine, this will be more important from now on, etc. And so, presenting new value, exploring new value and also determining new value is, the two key things. And after listening to what Joy-san was saying, another important role for the journalist is to put your name on and, take responsibility for the article. Because, just like, self-driving car, there's a discussion about, if self-driving car make crashes into something, who will take the responsibility? And, only human can. So, I think that's the three, role that will be important in the short term.
And just to give one example about what's happening in the future versus what machines can do. Mm-hmm. So this is several years ago, but Amazon created a AI to using all of the historical HR data at Amazon. This is a famous case, and so once they turned it on and started using it, it didn't want to hire women because historically at Amazon, women didn't get promoted and they didn't perform well because it was biased against women. But if you're using historical data, that's where you end up. But obviously, that's not where you want to go, right? And so predictions are predictive, but mm-hmm. they don't help us go where we want to go. And I think that is a really important role. And courts play a role in this. Journalists play a role. But I think we're trying to change mm-hmm. and not be easily predicted. And I think that part is actually quite difficult to do for machines.
Thank you so much. Through your conversation, I want to highlight this topic to the investors of venture capital, not only the Japanese, to the international as well. Right now, we have a system to secure our data. We use copyright system for the singer, they secure their singing content. The content creators on YouTube, they can be secure their content by the copyright, by the YouTube strikes. Even though the digital artist can be secure their content as an NFT through using the blockchain technology. But in the media, mainstream media, the journalists don't have this kind of technology. They can be secure their articles. I have interviewed with many journalists who are creating the story, and they required more than sometimes 6 months or even though 1 year to create a story. They publish their article on the big stream media, and once they get it, they just receive the recognition, no monetary benefit after that. And the other person will copy their content. Just give them the reference of the mainstream media, not mention the writer name or journalist name. So what do you think about that? That do we need to use this kind of technology to secure or copyright the journalist content, their articles, their stories?
Oh, so I'm quite cynical. I think copyright is fundamentally broken, and it was broken a long time ago along with patents. I think the original copyright was tried to protect the individual inventor in the garage or the creative writer during their sort of somewhat romantic creative process. But once we started commercializing invention and publication, that's disappeared. So if you look at it no longer protects the individual. I mean, they've been saying that, but like even so it's quite interesting to see the New York Times versus OpenAI case, because it's actually 180 from an earlier case. I'm trying to remember what year it was, but the New York Times was sued by its independent writers, because what New York Times did was they took all of their articles and then put them in a database, and the contract with the journalists didn't allow for that use. So the journalists sued the New York Times for transforming their work without permission. And the journalists won, but the New York Times just said, okay, well, if you don't give us the rights, we're basically cutting you off. And they basically manhandled the journalists into giving up their rights, and the journalists didn't actually get any money out of this settlement. And what happened was the New York Times said, we're the powerful party here, we're the ones with the lawyers, you journalists work for us, and now that we have digital rights, we're just going to take those. And they said, because without the New York Times, we wouldn't have journalism, and journalism is important, and we're the New York Times. Now, what happens is New York Times articles get used to train OpenAI, and the New York Times says to OpenAI, you used our articles without permission, we're the New York Times, we're protecting journalism, you should either shut down or pay us for these articles. And now they're in the position of the journalists, and it's sort of really where you stand depends on where you sit. In the New York Times, you know, and now copyright is all about big companies, and the journalists aren't even in this conversation anymore. It's New York Times versus OpenAI. And so I think what has to happen eventually is that we have the idea of intellectual property, that you kind of own this thing, and then, you know, Mickey Mouse gets protected because Disney has the lawyers and the money to try to protect it. And yes. So I think that, you know, the law is no longer protecting the creative process, it's protecting the investors and it's protecting the owners of these rights. It's very difficult in the United States as well as in Japan to change anything that goes against sort of capitalist interests of where the power is, and this is why a lot of the why it takes a long time for transformation. But really, I really do think that there isn't anyone. There's not a lot of incentive for people to worry too much about the individual, and I think that what happens with waves, and we can talk about this later, but like the beginning of the internet or even like Web3 is these transformations in digital architecture are caused because a lot of individuals are disgruntled with the way that the current system is, and they're coming up with a technical solution to get around existing incumbent architectures. And I think that it's very difficult to do from a legal and policy-only place, because we don't have the commercial energy to support the politics that you need to change somebody to help the poor people, because the poor people don't have representation. I mean, I'm quite cynical about capitalism and democracy in this kind of context.
As one individual, its voice is nothing. But if we have a group, the journalists have a group, and discuss about the same topic and have a same motive, so I think we can do something in that case. And for this reason, the FCCJ, the IT committee, is here for every journalist who want to take some initiate in an innovative sector, innovative part in the media industry. So we are here for them. Nobi-san, I have one question that we already discussed about that Adobe are taking some step through recognition of the copyright.
Oh yes, well, yeah. So Adobe has started this thing called Content Authenticity Initiative. Have you heard of it? So that's their program. You know, I think it's a very good initiative. So it's not just Adobe, but Nikon and all the media outlet in the U.S. are joining this initiative. But so what they are trying to do is, as soon as you Nikon implements this technology, as soon as you take a shot, press the shutter and take a picture with your camera, your signature will be in the picture. And if somebody tries to edit the picture with using Photoshop or something, there will be signature of the retoucher. So this photo was retouched by Joe Ito using his Photoshop. So all this will be be in the blockchain, and so people can find out what sort of path this content we went through. But the problem is it's right now they are working only for photograph, but I think the idea has good, very good potential. If some company like Apple, which makes macOS and iOS, and Google, which makes Android, cooperate, we can do something like this on text, based information as well. And going back to the previous discussion, I think, I'm cynical as Joy-san is, but I think this is a very good opportunity because of the Gen AI, because Gen AI is making so much fake information so cheaply. Everybody's discussing what we can do about it, and right now is a very good timing for discussion.
Yeah, I think I was cynical more generally about copyright as the way that journals will end up getting paid more. I don't think that's going to solve that problem. I mean, fixing copyright is an important thing, but it's less important for individuals and more important for businesses at this point right now in copyright's lifetime. But I do think, provenance, tamper-proofing, taking care of things like where things are, and tracking authentication and things like that. I think that's a very important part of the infrastructure. And I do think right now, again, getting back to sort of LLMs and AI, I think the more AI trains on other AI, the dumber it's going to get. Because again, it's not bringing in any new experiences. And if you have, in an AI model, there are lots of little errors. And you see them sometimes as hallucinations, but they can also be biases. And what happens is the real world can help solve those errors, but the more AIs feed on itself, the more those biases just get amplified. It's kind of like inbreeding. And so the models will get worse and worse and worse the more it eats even if its own AI, but also other AIs. And so the value of independent, fresh, live data is going to get really high, and the AI companies need it. And right now, there's not a very easy way to tell if your food has already been processed or whether it's fresh. And I think that's going to become a significant issue. And then the other thing is happening is a lot of these places, so journalism is one, but another, and again, if journalists start just relying on AI too much, they're going to start producing stuff that basically sounds like stuff that is already in the system. And it just, again, amplifies it just tunes it in the wrong way. I mean, it's like anyway, so we have to, the AI companies have to figure this out, or their systems are going to just start to get dumber and dumber rather than smarter. And then there are a lot of community sites, like this is kind of last year was a big issue, but places like Stack Overflow where geeks go and help each other answer questions. And that's really important because it's like the sort of, communities of help. The thing that happened was the AI started training against those communities and would produce faster and better answers than going and asking the question. But then it demotivated people from answering questions in the community, so the source of that data is now diminishing. And so what's happening with AI is sort of killing the sources of the data. And another important thing is, if it weren't for the internet, we wouldn't have AI. It's that all of this information is out there and you can train it. And I do think that we're starting to not punish, but sort of demotivate people who typically were feeding the internet. So I think this is a huge kind of information environmental problem. And it could be, one version of the future is that the internet and public sort of websites and stuff just become so degraded that very high quality, pure, authenticated journalism from the newswires becomes suddenly gold for the AI community, and that would be quite an interesting twist, I think.
If I can go back a little bit to the consent authentication topic, actually, I think this is not the first time the tech industry has done something like this. Long time ago, there was it's still there, but Creative Commons was there, and you are serving as director or something.
Yeah.
And I think there was something in the Creative Commons, like putting code for each content, if it's open. And unfortunately, Creative Commons is not as successful as we have expected. But what is the reason, do you think, if I may?
So Creative Commons. Let's see. I'm trying to think why. So I think it was successful in unlocking certain things. So I think a lot of the photos that journalists use now are Creative Commons. I think it has helped unlock a lot of open publishing. So there have been certain sectors where Creative Commons has become useful. And I think it kind of served. There was a period where the record labels and other people were really cracking down on a certain class of creative works, but now they shifted the model to streaming and things like that. So some of it has been a business context, and I think that Creative Commons, we created this metadata, so it was machine readable. And I think that the architecture of the internet changed a little bit, so that wasn't really where people were starting to use AI and fingerprinting to check the provenance of photos without using the metadata. So there's some technical reasons as well. Yeah.
We have a last question. After that, we will go for the QA session. I want to know about Joy-san or Nobi-san remarks about that. How can we use the blockchain technology to make some decentralized media, especially to support the journalism community? So their asset, their articles, their story there will be a long-term asset for them. You can be say that the pension for them. If they don't want to be worked, their asset will be sold, just like NFTs and all that. So what do you think about that?
So I think, first of all, the blockchain is really important from an architecture perspective, because right now your wallet and your ID and your friends are all on Facebook and Twitter and these platforms. With the blockchain, you're in the infrastructure. And so if you buy an NFT on one site, you can go sell it on another one. So your personal information and your connection is on the blockchain and the protocol. And the equivalent of the platforms for the blockchain, they don't own your data anymore. So the reason Facebook and all these things are powerful is they own your data. So they can charge 50, 80, 100% margins. So the content people get nothing, and the users are locked in. And what the blockchain does is it takes the user out. And so if you look at NFT marketplaces, they're like 3% or 2% commissions, because they have to compete with each other. If you just imagine that all of your content on Twitter and Facebook can be viewed on any other platform, and then what happens is the user gets more power and the content producer gets more power. So what the Web 2.0 did is it took content and squeezed it and made the platform really fat and put the individual in the platform. But now what's happening is your user information is in the protocol, so the protocol gets fat. So so Ethereum and Bitcoin are way more financially viable than TCP/IP or internet protocols, and the content suddenly can disintermediate the platform. So just as an architecture, we're going to shift where the user and the content makers have more power, and you'll start to see ways that connect the user with the content. But they just can't charge as much because they don't have a monopoly anymore.
Yes.
And then we see the courts now going after Google and privacy. And so I think we're going to see a breakup of this. I think it's going to be interesting to see what the new intermediary is going to be. It could end up being some version of AI. It could be more community-oriented stuff. And kind of what is a content producer versus a user may become more fuzzy, and they might start mixing a little bit more. Something that looks a little bit more like user-generated data, but I think fundamentally blockchain is a good thing. In the short run, because it's still unregulated and it's still hard to use, there are scams, it's expensive, there's a bunch of things going on. But I think in the midterm it will just unlock a tremendous amount of value for creators.
What about you, Nobi-san?
Well, I think if the Joy-san's scenario of a genuine journalist, this journalist's genuine article, will have more value, then blockchain and NFT technology can be the way to authenticate, that. And I think if that, in that very soon, who the author is will be more important than the which publication it is on. I mean, this disruption, started, when social media came out. Before social media, people were buying, this magazine or newspaper, and so they had this context of, this magazine cover page or something. But today, people go direct, from one tweet or post or whatever to the article. And I think one of the reasons, there's so much flame on the social media is because people read articles, without looking at the cover of the magazine. Before the social media era, people, said, oh, this magazine is gossip magazine, so of course they talk like this. But today, people reader will read the article, without knowing the context of the media. But I think very soon this will be even more disrupted, and then it will be not the media, company per se, but more like curation, So the media company will be more like curator of the other various journalists.
Thank you so much. Now we have a QA session. Over to you. If you have any question, you can ask to the speakers.
If I could just ask a question, you said some really interesting things about changes in the. Oh, do I need a microphone?
Yes.
I can speak loudly.
Just go up there.
Yeah, so you said some very interesting things about media.
Could you go up there?
You have to be on camera.
Oh, they want me on camera. Wow. Yeah, see, I really appreciate the interesting things you said about media production and the industry, the media industry. And I'm wondering what you think about demand, the demand side. We see something like TikTok coming along, and people are, it's literally addictive. It is the most addictive. That's what they've cracked. They've kind of cracked the code for media addiction. And it's not news media, it's another kind of media. So I'm wondering if you could just talk about that a little bit and how you see, the general public's demand for news media versus entertainment media, and how you see that shaping out.
Yeah, it is a scary thing, isn't it? And I read a paper a while ago, and so I might mangle it and get it wrong, but if you look at American presidents and the media of the time, it's really interesting. So I think there was a period in history where, the media of the time was, public squares and debates, and then so you had these sort of articulate people, and then you had, and then it became sort of newspaper and then television, and then you ended up with telephoto lenses. So you ended up, going, and then now social media. So you have, great orators, and then people who look good on camera, like Reagan, and now you have, social media clowns. And I think that the media really defines the politics of the day, and it's really kind of weirdly technology also defines what media becomes the thing that kind of sets the way what people expect. And I feel like in a bad way, it is kind of a direction that we're going that you can't go back, and I'm now getting older. I'm 58, so I always wear kids these days. But I think so. I'm not sure whether we're going to get easily away from these short form videos as the unit of a consumption and expression. But I would go back a little bit to the goal, right? So I think one of the problems right now is that the way that the platforms are designed, the goal is to make short-term quarterly earnings for large public tech companies. And so the goal is not to bring people together to form a consensus and to do what the media used to do. And so so we've lost the mission of media, and I think it is it's an interesting problem that's related to what I would call the paradigm, right? So the paradigm, if we think about it right now, is accounting and money. So we measure things with money, and we've become, and if you measure things with money, you sort of ultimately judge things with money. And so right now, the person with the most money wins, and the technology has made things so efficient that everything has become more short-sighted. So I think that it's sort of the combo. I think you could probably come up with a media form that is more about short-form video and things like that, if the goal was really to bring consensus and have conversation and get things together. And I would separate out a little bit the somewhat like negative feeling we might have to the form of media from kind of the goal of the media, which is just to do pure sort of addictive engagement. And what I think, so I've been working, for instance, I've been going to Bhutan a lot. And in Bhutan, there's a king, and there's a bunch of people who are, really working in service of the king, and they have a community that's kind of young, fresh, and somewhat happy. And they use social media. So if you, again, inside of social media, you find clusters of people who are using it in kind of very pro-social ways. And I think often kids are using it to learn and things like that. So to answer, this is long-winded, but I think the answer is that I think we need to adapt journalism to the form of media and the technology that we have. I think what we need to do is look at the incentives behind the architecture and the advertising and the users. But I think this is more of a societal values thing. And again, if I were to go full circle on this, I feel like if you look at the young kids, the kids protesting, pro-Palestine protests, you look like at the environmental movement, you look at some of the anti-capitalist movements that use social media, they're using it in a very different way, and they're using it in a way that would be very reminiscent to what we thought the role of media was. And so I think we have to adapt to where the kids are going. And again, I've just been getting a lot of social media from my former students at MIT who are really concerned about the coverage of the Palestinian and Lebanese issue. And that one, it feels like the mainstream media are completely out to lunch compared to how the Lebanon war was covered in 1982. And in fact, you don't see it necessarily on social media, but there's a whole bunch of social media that are actually digging in pretty deeply on that. So I'm very interested to see kind of the pockets of. Do you know the term positive deviance? It's by a guy named Richard Pascal, which is don't try to change the whole thing, but to look at deviant behavior that does the thing that you want to do and try to amplify that. So I'm sort of trying to look at how some movements are hacking social media to do things that the news media should be doing. And again, it's not necessarily a bright future, but I think that's where some of the knowledge, some of the insight might come from.
Nobisa, you want to add something?
Well, no, I don't. Well, I think the messaging on TikTok or something like that, people will eventually graduate from those kind of information. It's like stimulate, and I think even though some the kind of message we get from those short-term video, etc., is stimulating, there are a good number of good documentary, or movie, etc., on Netflix, etc., and there are a good number of people, appreciating those. So we need to encourage.
And I guess the way I was saying on this, this is a little bit rude maybe, but the social media gives you what you deserve. It's showing you what you want.
True.
So when I was going to Bhutan to try to understand what young people were thinking and started following their feeds, all I got were these wonderful videos about young Bhutanese talking about their life in Bhutan. So it's more, if you get an ugly news feed, it has more to do with you than it does with the people in some cases. Yeah, it is kind of a mirror. But what I would say, sorry, I'm going to go off on this a little bit because I think it's kind of important. Sort of philosophically, people are a whole bundle of different desires and wants. And so I may want a beer at 5 p.m., but my 8 a.m. gym-bound me doesn't want me to want the beer at 5 p.m. And you sort of have the longest term desire for the most number of people is the highest order want. And your short-term desires that come from hunger or lust or addiction are not really the want that you really like. But if somebody's serving you beer ads at 5 p.m., they're serving a very lower base want. But what you really want is to be a better person, to have a good family, to love, and things like that. And so what you want to do is you want systems to be servicing your highest, best version of yourself and that desire of long-term happiness for the world. And all of those are competing for energy. And I think one of the problems with some of the social media stuff is that they really go after the shortest term pleasure-driven want, because that's kind of what you can sell into. It's harder to sell products to the part of you that just wants peace on earth, right? And so, but I think it's kind of unfair when a lot of these companies say, oh, we're just giving people what they want. But you really want something better. And I think if you could serve ads to yourself, if you say, make sure you send me the gym ad at 5 p.m. and not the beer ad, and that when you're in the best mode, when you've had a good family meeting and you're happy and you're healthy, then you get to decide what your day looks like, what your media because also it's the same with media, right? You want to read that documentary book about this thing and not some bad novel. But once you start to lose energy and willpower, you end up in this kind of lower order. So again, I think part of this could come from control, giving us more control. But part of it, again, is the goal of the platform.
Thank you so much. Before we going to the second question, I would like to be reintroduce Devsa. First of all, thank you so much to join this event as an ex-president of FCCJ. It's our honor that you are here. He is just like a fusion of IT and media. Under his observation, we create a first time we have an online system for the non-member of FCCJ. They can be join the events of FCCJ, especially the IT committee event online, and they don't need to be go for the reception desk directly. So we are trying to do so many things, and thank you so much to be joined this event. If you have any question, you can be asked.
Thank you for the very enlightening story. Just a question probably to Dr. Ito as an educator. That's the things is like a young people's addiction to media, that's structure, etc. Doesn't sound very bright. However, as an educator, if you would like to, especially in the beginning of the, you are talking about how the people would make something in using technology, etc. How would you, as an educator, how would you like to influence if you, for a young kid, or say something to them to them believe that they could make the world a little bit better?
Yeah. So getting back to my point that I was making, that I think society has been trying to create standardized, interchangeable humans to scale after the Industrial Revolution. I think, and in education, we often call this deficit-based education. So deficit-based basically means, let's say you love mathematics, but you're not very good at English. Well, you better study English so you can pass the test. And you don't need to study math anymore because you're fine. You know, that's deficit-based. So you end up with everyone focused on the thing they are worst at. And it reduces passion, and it really standardizes people. Asset-based is, you like math, go all out. And if you don't like English, you know, you just have to have a bare minimum. And if you think about the fact that robots and AI can take care of more and more, like I was about to spend half my time learning Japanese now that I've come back. And I decided, you know what, AIs are going to catch up. I'm the president of a university, and I can't read and write Japanese properly. But instead of focusing all of my energy on that, I'm pursuing the things that I'm good at. And what you find, I think, is that now with technology, you can support that. And also getting back to AI and society right now benefits from as many people doing as many different things as possible. Diversity is really important because it used to be that every Japanese conglomerate had to do everything themselves, and everybody did the same version of everything else. And I think especially as software becomes more open and more composable, you only have to write one piece of software once, and then everybody can do it. I'll just go out on a tangent for a second. So modular open software is to software systems and knowledge what compounding interest rates were to finance. So before, everybody would write the same software 100 times. Now you write it once and everybody uses it. And it's the same with people. You have to say something different from somebody else to be very valuable, which is very different from sort of old white-collar work. And so I think what's important, and the problem, right, in not just in Japan, but in general, is what you do in school is you basically say, okay, forget about your interests and your passion. Just learn to do as you're told and pass this test. And you end up, particularly in Japan, with a lot of people who are really good at doing what they're told very carefully. But that's not how you become an artist, or that's not how you get your PhD. So Japan has a very declining PhD for a variety of reasons. But PhD, you don't have to do, and you don't get a PhD by doing as you're told. Japan has 29 Nobel Prize laureates. MIT has 98, because in Japan, I was talking to a scholar that studies Nobel Prizes, and most Nobel Prize winners, first of all, most geniuses, including Nobel Prize winners, are autistic, although not most autistic people are Nobel Prize winners. But, and with a particular category of autistic people who become Nobel Prize winners, there's usually somebody on the outside, like a science teacher or a friend, that says, hey, that's really interesting, and gives them a nudge. And then they just go crazy, and then they can pop out. And there was and this ties to neurodiversity, which is, so Temple Grandin, who's a famous autistic scientist, she said if it weren't for autistic people, we'd be sitting in caves with no fire. So most science and technology comes from these somewhat obsessive people picking the thing that they're good at and just doing it like crazy. And I feel like it used to be pretty difficult to support these people, and in countries like Japan, it was very negative, although there were some strange and still are some strange pockets of Japanese people. But I think we'll shift a lot. So I still think you need people who are organized and do as they're told, and you still need that part. But instead of that being 90% of what we focus on in education, I think you'll support the traditional learners, but I think allowing for neurodiversity, allowing for disabilities, and using that difference to feed the AI, to feed society is a key thing. And so I think really it's kind of celebrating your difference and your weirdness is the thing that educators could do. And then I'll say one other piece. I mean, we've had the internet now for about 40 years. And the day that, so when I was in high school at the American School in Japan, I remember writing email to the author of the physics textbook we were using, because I thought my teacher was wrong, and he was. And I found out because I talked to the professor that wrote the textbook, and in class I said, you're wrong. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, I wrote the author of this textbook and asked him, and you're doing that wrong. And it was kind of a horrible student, right? But if you think about every student could already do that, 40 years ago, that should have been the end of teachers as the monopoly of information, the vending machine of knowledge. But we still do that. Somehow, schools still get away with pretending like the teacher is the one that knows best. But now with AI, that's, I think, even more gone. I think really what teachers and schools should be is a place to do projects, a place to get to know each other, a place to get coaching from your senior advisors. And I think that we're starting to see project-based learning and stuff like that in Japan. But I really do think that's important. And then I think that part of this, though, is that the workplace still looks for degrees and looks for traditional, they don't know another way to evaluate humans. So part of this is going to be assessing. And if companies start hiring people who are actually skilled rather than people who have the credentials, I think it will change very quickly. At the Media Lab, when I was there, I mean, many of our students were homeschooled. They had no credentials, but our faculty had the confidence and the ability to judge students by what they were rather than by their credentials. And I think the more businesses that do that, the more traditional education is going to break down.
Neurodiversity is such an inspiring word. I first read that word, in the article, your conversation with Barack Obama on Wired. And since then, the word has been so inspiring to me. Yeah.
Thank you.
But I think, it will be inspiring to you all, too.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much for your thank you very much for your speech. By the way, I'm the same age as Joyce. I'm 58, born 1966, and I've been on the internet since '85. What they call it, DARPANET, or whatever they like to call it. And this year, February, I believe Dr. Andrew Ng of Stanford University came to speak here. Mm-hmm. And I asked the same question as I said, I believe that AI is getting much smarter every in this, not quantum speed, warp speed, I should have said back then, and getting much smarter and smarter every day. In May, when I had the Google Gemini read my document, he said, it was saying, "Konnichiwa, Wada-san." Now, a week later, it was like, "Konnichiwa, Wada-san." That's how improving it is day by day. But the thing is, AI is getting much smarter, but the vast majority of people seems to get dumber. What do you say? Do you have any opinion on this?
I guess it does feel like people are getting dumber. But it could be that they're focusing their energy somewhere else. I'm always careful about using, because I think the older generation always think the younger generation is not as smart or not as with it, and this is kind of a really long history. And I think people always underestimate kind of the interesting things that come out of new technology. I mean, I think when books first came out, they thought that this was going to destroy children, and there are all these articles, criticizing books as a technology that took children out of playing. I was a disc jockey, and disc jockeys weren't considered artists because they were just playing other people's music. But there's actually an art to that too, and I think that young people are coming up with different ways to learn, different ways to do things. So I'm curious in looking for where we see the energy. But I do agree that it feels a little bit distressful seeing what's going on. I mean, I think we talked a little bit about Web3, but I think what's interesting about Web3, and again, I hate to push it too much because there's still so much scamminess, but when you look at the pockets of things that are going on that are really interesting, is it allows young people and other people to actually collaborate and build things and exchange value without the overhead of formal national IDs or setting up bank accounts. And I can imagine nonprofits or young people actually building and also because it doesn't take as much money and energy to get going, and it's getting easier and easier. Because right now, like this is a perfect example. This IT committee, FCCJ, part of the reason that you're struggling is that the cost of operating a nonprofit is so high. But with Web3, you can actually get that without all of that cost. And I've been working a lot with the Taiwanese, and even in Bhutan, where we're starting to come up with national, using NFTs as ID systems. And my view is one of the biggest problems against entrepreneurship in Japan is the Japanese. You're probably like 45 years old before you actually have the ability to be responsible for a budget, right? And by then, you have a family and a mortgage, and you're really not able to take risks. And I do think that, like, I dropped out and started building companies like when I was 18 and 19. And doing it early is really important. So I think what Web3 allows is for very young kids to become leaders, to try things, to experiment, to take risk. And I think the ability to build things is becoming super easy. And I think that will create a new generation of active entrepreneurial people who can try to cause change. Right now, they can cause trouble, but I think they can possibly cause change. And I think that may start to create things like political activism in Japan that doesn't exist, and allow a kind of poking of the system that we can't do right now.
Thank you very much. Dr. En's opinion was very close to yours, and he did say humans are getting much smarter in different ways, and probably is in a different ways, spending their energy in different method. So this is why the vast majority seems really getting done, but actually they're striving other places where we don't know. That's probably a case.
I mean, so because I when I was in 4th grade, the HP calculator came out, and my father was a chemist, and I asked him if I could buy the calculator, and he said, "Of course not. You won't learn it." And I said, "But did you do planetary orbits in 4th grade?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Because you couldn't, because you didn't have a calculator." And I think there's sort of a version of that with these kids. I mean, I see 14-year-old kids starting businesses. I see 13-year-old, even with games. So I do a lot of online games. But there was this, like an 8-year-old kid that used to run what's a raid, so an 8-hour project with 40 adults listening to him and taking orders, and he was managing a fairly large team at 8 years old. And so I think from sort of an organizational, entrepreneurial perspective, kids don't have to wait anymore, and that's unlocking a different. And I think the good parts of crypto is that there are a bunch of people who don't necessarily have permission that are running around and setting things up, and I think that's kind of interesting.
Thank you very much. My son's like that.
Thank you so much. Now we're going to end this session. Before we're going to end this session, I need a few remarks about that. What you will be give to as an advice to entrepreneur, especially the AI sector and media sector, that what they need to do. The second thing, in the journalism right now, we have more than the person who have the age of 45. So what your suggestion for them? So what kind of innovation they can be make in the media industry?
So I think what's really important is that so the metaphor that I would use is that technology is kind of like, so if you're an architect, the material, so you have to know design, you have to know social science, economics, but you also have to understand your materials. So if you're in Japan, 100 years ago, you're building one-story houses out of wood and ceramic tiles and paper. And so you're not going to build a skyscraper. But once you get into the age, and you may not want to, but you could now with glass and concrete and steel, you can build skyscrapers. But you can't if you don't really understand the physics of the materials. And I think one of the things that technology is doing is that it's giving us completely new materials. But if the architects, so these are the business people or the politicians, if they don't understand the materials, they're going to try to build one-story houses out of concrete and steel instead of trying to build something else. And I think this is one of the biggest problems of digital transformation in Japan, is you have no technical people who are in positions of power. They're just outsourced to. So to connect that to entrepreneurship, I think that you have technical people who understand the technology, and then you have domain people like. And again, there's a certain class of journalists who understand what journalism is trying to do, that understand the kind of the whole ecosystem of journalism. And I think bringing the technical people, it's best if it's in the same body, but if it's not in the same body, I think it's a collaboration. And if you look at the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution is famous for creating factories that put mom and pop sort of local artisans out of work. So like shoes became mass produced. But if you look at the detail, it wasn't some outsider that created the first factories. It was artisans who knew how to make shoes by hand, realizing that they had capital became available, and it was the professionals in the field that reinvented it. So I feel like if we're going to reinvent media, it's going to be journalists and other people who understand media working very closely with people who understand the new technology like AI and Web3 to come up with the new version of media. And when technical people try to create media without really understanding the real theory of media, they end up building platforms that don't solve any of the problems. You know, like Elon Musk talking about free speech, but not really understand what he's talking about, creating this kind of pit, right? And so I think that's key, but I think you need to create sort of a mutual respect. And again, I think if you have a young person, it's easier to go from technology to media. So I taught a course at Harvard with MIT engineers and Harvard Law School students. And several of our engineers went on to get law school degrees, but no lawyers came to get engineering degrees. So it may be easier to find young engineers who want to become journalists. But in any case, I think bringing those two worlds together, and I think once you do that, we can, and everyone needs to experiment. But I think that's where the key is.
What about you, Nobi-san?
I don't think I should add anything. This is a perfect way to close the talk. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I hope the investor will be attract more to media side especially, and they will be guide, because at the end we need the finance. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, all of you, to join us, and we request you to join our IT committee. And if you feel some kind of innovation or have some idea related to the IT sector, so we are here, Wada-san, me. So we are trying to improve ourselves more. Thank you so much.
And good luck.
Thank you very much. Please give a big applause to these two people.